My name is Rick Manelius, and I'm part of the Drud Tech team found at drud.com. And today I was going to go over a demonstration of DDEV, which is a local development environment management system specifically for the WordPress and Drupal CMSs at this time, although we have future plans to expand into other communities. You can find the project page if you go to github.com/drud/ddev. And you can read all about it, but let me just try to give you the highlights. The first is that in order to use DDEV, you only need a few things. The first is Docker, because this is a containerized system. So we're basically using containers to manage all of our services like Nginx, MySQL, etc., which does require you to install the Docker for Mac. You'll need your IDE, which could be anything from TextPaint or Sublime. And then you just need to download the DDEV binary. And we've provided several different mechanisms for you to do that. The first is you can use a one-line install script, a bash script, by placing this in your terminal and running it. Or if you prefer to compile directly, you could download the binary, put it into your local bin, or you can actually clone out the git repo, install go, compile it, and place it where you like. Once you've done that, you should be able to access it on the command line and see the help file where you can see everything from starting, stopping, SSHing, etc., etc. So the first thing we're going to walk you through is how to get a new site up and running, specifically a WordPress site. So if I clear my terminal and I run DDEV list, you'll see at this time that there are no running applications, i.e. there are no sites that DDEV is aware of. But if I go over to Drud and I download or go to the WordPress repo, which is just a clone of the main repository, I can bring that down, cd into the directory. Now, if you do an ls-la, you can see that we already have a DDEV folder in there which stores the configuration and YAML file necessary to power DDEV. But in order to, if it wasn't there, all we would have to do is run DDEV config and answer a few questions. By default, we will actually pull the repo name that you're going to get clone for in order to specify what you want as the project label, essentially. Here we'll just use WordPress. And basically, here we want to specify the doc root. Now, since there's an htdocs folder inside the main parent folder, we want to specify that so we know where to serve the web server from. And then finally, we have a little bit of detection, so we know if it's a WordPress or a Drupal site based on some fingerprints of whether the changelog.txt file exists, etc., etc. So with that all said, now the configuration is in place. So all we need to do now is run DDEV start. So since I've run DDEV in the past, you don't see the process here of downloading the containers. So everything from Nginx and MySQL, both the proxy layer and also the web server layer, are using containers that will update and pull from our repositories on GitHub and Docker Hub. And at this time, what it is spinning up these multiple containers and a proxy to serve or to set the local DNS host entries, and basically just getting it ready to go. And so it may take up to a few minutes, and here we go. We can see that the URL was provided here. So if I just copy paste that in my terminal, I can see that I'm brought to an install page. We don't assume that a person spinning up a new site wants to go through a site install immediately, although we could potentially change that assumption down the road. So if I start the normal WordPress installation process, we'll need to know what are the credentials in order to access the MySQL container within the container. So there's a second DDEV command called DDEV describe, which will actually provide you information with respect to the database, with respect to other tools like Mailhog and phpMyAdmin that are available. So if I have data and root database host, and I also know that if I click here, oops, I think we actually have a secondary DB host in the short term, which, oh, and I also need to put in root. There we go. And then I'm right here at the normal site installation process. So I'm just going to say Rick because I'm going to throw this away. And example.com, install WordPress, and then I'm off to the races. And there you go. So that was I was able to quickly get a new WordPress site up and running within a couple minutes by just downloading the repo, running a DDEV config, running DDEV start to create the containers, move the repository in the right location, and then using DDEV describe, find the credentials used to establish the WordPress connection and the WordPress installation, and then I'm up and running with a live site. And now if I run DDEV list, I'll actually see that I have a site named WordPress, which is a WordPress type. Its location is here, its URL is there, and it's up and running. So now what I want to do is I want to actually install a second site. So I'm going to go to the DRUD repositories, and I'm going to actually get a second one called Drupal Kickstart, which is actually a Drupal 7 Commerce Kickstart site. I'm going to clone it. Oops, that already exists. Ha! So let me just get into there. And since I don't remember what I put last time, I'm going to run DDEV config. Again, I'm just going to keep the site name identical to the repository, and docroot, which is where my index.php file is for Drupal. And there we go. And just because I want to run a get status just to confirm everything is good, so I should be able to just run a DDEV start. And DDEV is going to create a second set of containers, the database, phpMyAdmin, and the web server, in order to have completely isolated environments from the WordPress site, which I installed previously, and the Drupal site, which I'm installing right now. So while that is going, I'm going to actually get a second tab open. So if I go back to that WordPress site, and again, now I have two sites operational at this time, I can do a couple things here. If I don't want to use the resources from that first WordPress site, I'm done working with it, I want to shut it down, I can actually run a DDEV stop. And what that's going to do is it's basically going to leverage Docker's wrap Docker CLI and just pause those containers so they're not taking up resources, and therefore I'll also not be able to access that site as I had done before. So if I go back to here and I try to access the WordPress.local, service is temporarily unavailable, so the proxy container, which is directing the traffic, gets to a 503. But if I go back to the original one and I copy that URL, I should be able to access this. Now I'm going to go back and start that WordPress container again. So I'm going to go DDEV start, and this process should be a little bit faster this time because I'm not necessarily having to go through and moving files around and do all that. I'm basically just getting my containers up and operational again and adjusted so that the proxy layer is hitting it correctly. So let's see. So I have DDEV, the WordPress site, and I have DDEV Drupal Kickstart. And as you can see here, I was already just dropped to the install page for Commerce Kickstart. Now, the next command, so I've showed you DDEV list, describe, stop. Now let's try to SSH in there. So I can actually, there's a couple shortcut commands. So DDEV SSH will just log me right into the container and drop me right into docroot. So if I'm here, I can see my Drupal site. Alternatively, I could run a command called DDEV exec, which will allow me to run an arbitrary command, including ls, including whatever I may want inside the container itself. We also have DDEV logs, which will basically pull the error logs from the web server, although you can specify additional flags to get to the database server itself. And going back to the DDEV describe command, oops. We could see that by default, our containers include additional services like MailHog, which will capture all emails from the container rather than sending out them into sending live emails to potentially to clients or to other locations, as well as phpMyAdmin. So if I just click into this, you can see, actually open up a different window in a different tab, that phpMyAdmin is there. And then going back to MailHog, MailHog is there, and I can basically use it to trigger emails. So for example, if I wanted to go through the privacy agreement, do the site installation, and it'll fire off an admin email, it would capture there as well. So I could go through the import commands, but they are a little bit more involved, and again, the process is pretty straightforward. We have an import DB and import files command, so all you would do is download in your archive, either a Drush archive for Drupal or a WordPress archive, and you can independently pull in the database and the files. And the beauty of that is both the WordPress and Drupal sites, when you import them, will modify, if you haven't gone through a site install, will modify the settings.php or the WordPress config file to include the database credentials once you import that database. And so with that said, that's the end of our initial demo. I hope you found it valuable. And again, DDEV is currently at version 0.3, and we have a lot of exciting things on our roadmap. So please visit our repo, watch it if you would like, and please file any issues you have in the issue queue. Thank you.